The night my mother told me to start paying rent or get out, she said it with two juice boxes in one hand, my sister's diaper bag dangling from her wrist, and my sister's twin boys smearing peanut butter into the sofa cushions I had cleaned exactly 1 hour earlier. She said it loud enough for everyone in the kitchen to hear. If you want to live here, you need to start contributing like an adult. I was standing there in my hospital scrubs, just home from a 12-hour overnight shift at an emergency veterinary clinic, looking at the woman who had spent 4 years treating me like a full-time nanny with a pulse. My sister laughed from the kitchen island. Honestly, Mom should have charged you sooner. You act like watching the kids is some enormous sacrifice. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not even hurt, just still. Because I suddenly understood with total clarity that they did not see me as a daughter or a sister, or even a person with her own life. I was the backup plan, the unpaid help, the one who never said no. So I smiled. I put my keys on the counter. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out the travel bag I had packed 2 months earlier, just in case I ever found the courage, and zipped it closed in front of both of them. My mother crossed her arms, waiting for me to break. My sister told the boys to say goodbye to Aunt ABA, as though I'd be back before dinner. I looked at both of them and thought one single thought. If I disappeared tonight, would they miss me, or would they miss the work I did? I already knew the answer. That's why the bag was already packed. I didn't cry when I left. That surprises people when I tell the story. They expect some dramatic collapse in the driveway, trembling hands, a last look at the house like I was leaving a piece of my heart behind. It wasn't like that. I was too exhausted to cry and too relieved to regret anything. The truth is I had been leaving that house in pieces for years before I ever walked out carrying that bag. Every overnight shift at the emergency clinic had become its own form of escape. 12 hours of blood draws and panicked pet owners and phones that never stopped ringing and the particular kind of adrenaline that comes from helping someone on the worst night of their week. Then I'd drive home at dawn, peel off my uniform, and walk into a house that somehow felt louder than the hospital. There was always something waiting for me. Sticky counters, children's songs blasting from a television, the twins crying over mismatched cups, my mother asking if I could just keep an eye on them for a few hours, which was code for surrender your entire day, my sister leaving with a kiss on the forehead and some light excuse about a sales closing, a work breakfast, a client visit, or needing an afternoon to breathe without interruptions. Nobody seemed to notice that I also needed that. In that house, my exhaustion was treated as an inconvenience rather than a fact. My sleep was optional. My schedule was negotiable. My body was assumed to be available. I drove slowly to a coffee shop nearby and bought myself an expensive brown sugar espresso and a warm blueberry muffin I didn't have to share with anyone. Then I sat in the car with the windows open, the morning sun hitting the steering wheel, and I started looking at apartment listings. The city looked different when I wasn't rushing between obligations. The streets seemed wider. The sky seemed cleaner. The whole city felt like it existed in layers I never had the time to notice. I found myself imagining simple things that felt ridiculously luxurious. A kitchen where I could leave a clean cup in the sink and know it would still be there when I got back. A bathroom without toys scattered across the floor. A morning where I could sleep without guilt. An afternoon where I could light a candle and read a book instead of reheating dinosaur nuggets for children who weren't mine. On the second day, I found a small apartment above a flower shop in the West Ashley neighborhood. Peeling white window frames, old hardwood floors, creaky stairs, a narrow balcony that barely fit 2 chairs, and a plant. The moment I walked in, it smelled like fresh paint and lilies from the shop below, and something I could only describe as possibility. The leasing manager kept apologizing for the old cabinets and the small closet. I barely heard her. I was just thinking that every centimeter of that apartment belonged to no emergency other than my own. I signed the lease before fear could catch up with me. That night I sat cross-legged on the floor with takeout in my lap, surrounded by 2 bags of essentials and a lamp still in its cardboard box, and felt more peace than I had known in years. It scared me in its own way. It always does. When you've been trained your whole life to associate love with obligation, freedom feels suspicious at first. But underneath the fear there was a steady pulse of relief that simply would not go away. Nobody knew where I was unless I chose to tell them. Nobody could open a door and assign me a role. Nobody could tell me that being tired was selfish, or that saying no meant I didn't care. And still, underneath all that peace, one question blinked at the edge of my mind like a pilot light that refused to go out. Was I actually selfish for finally choosing myself? Or had I just been trained to believe that freedom was a form of betrayal? The first 3 days I ignored every message. Not because I was strong, but because I knew exactly how it would go. First guilt, then pressure, then some version of family supports each other, spoken by the same people who only ever used that phrase when they needed free labor. On the 4th day, I listened to the voicemail sitting on the bare floor of my apartment with the lamp box beside me. My mother sounded breathless.
Not worried about me.
I noticed that. Worried about herself. You can't just disappear after everything I've done for you. I had to cancel a doctor's appointment because Belle couldn't get there in time, and the boys were impossible all morning. Do you know how humiliating it is to tell people that my own daughter abandoned her family? I laughed out loud at that. Abandoned. As though I had left children I gave birth to, debts I created, promises I made. I sent back one single sentence. I didn't abandon anyone. I moved. 10 seconds later the phone lit up with a video call from my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. The screen opened to pure chaos. One twin crying in the background, the television screaming a cartoon-themed song, my mother's hair half up, and behind her I could see laundry overflowing from baskets and dishes stacked in the sink. Then my sister's face appeared in frame. "Look what you did," she said immediately, swinging the phone to show me the living room. "The house is destroyed. Mom had to miss work yesterday because of you." Because of me. Not because a 32-year-old woman had spent years using her mother and her sister as unpaid childcare. Not because my mother had spent years normalizing that arrangement. Because of me. "No," I said. Something cold and clear settled inside me as I spoke. This is what the house looks like when I stop holding it together. My sister blinked, as though she hadn't expected resistance. My mother cut in fast, her voice climbing into full martyrdom. "You're killing me with this, ABA. You know I can't handle those boys alone. Belle has clients. I have responsibilities. We all depended on you." There it was. They didn't say we love you. They didn't say we miss you. They said we depended on you. I asked the question I should have asked years earlier. Did either of you ever once think about whether I was sleeping? Whether I was eating? Whether I was okay? Or was I just useful to you? Neither of them answered. My sister made a mocking sound. My mother started crying. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. When your family begs you to come back, are they missing you? Or are they missing the role you played? I ended the call before they could make it my fault again. 5 minutes later, I opened every shared account, every calendar, every school emergency contact form, every grocery delivery profile, every streaming subscription, every pickup authorization that still had my name on it. Because I had been managing their lives in ways they barely understood. I removed my name from all of it quietly and completely. Then I emailed the boys' after-school program and updated my emergency contact status from authorized to collect to not available. A clean, silent correction. If I was no longer enough of a family member to live there without paying rent, then I was no longer the backup for everything else either. I also started saying yes to things I had been automatically declining for years. A coworker had been asking me for months to join her Saturday ceramics class. I had always said I couldn't because family apparently required the sacrifice of every small dream I had. This time I went. I sat in front of a wheel in an oversized shirt with my hair pulled back, laughing as my first bowl collapsed into something lopsided and wrong. The instructor told me not to fight the clay. "Center it first," she said, placing her fingers over mine for one firm moment. "If your hands are tense, it will wobble every time." I don't know why that hit me as hard as it did, but it was my whole life, wasn't it? Years of trying to hold a shape under pressure, while everything around me spun too fast. Years of wobbling because I had never once been allowed to center myself first. At work, people noticed the change before I fully did. I stopped making small mistakes from exhaustion. I stopped going blank in the break room holding a vending machine coffee. I stopped apologizing for things that were not my fault. One of the veterinarians told me I looked awake for the first time in a year. I almost cried right there by the medication cabinet because I hadn't realized how visible my exhaustion had been to everyone except the people I was exhausted for. A few days later, the clinic director asked if I wanted to train for shift coordinator, a small promotion, slightly better pay, more stable hours. A month earlier, I would have automatically said no because my schedule had never belonged to me long enough to plan a future. This time I said yes before the old guilt could speak. The messages kept coming. My mother sent long paragraphs swinging between guilt and nostalgia, saying the house felt empty without me, conveniently leaving out that what she missed most was the help. My sister sent brief, pointed updates clearly designed to trigger panic. Mason had a meltdown at school pickup. Miles bit another kid. Mom's blood pressure is up. Hope your apartment is worth it. What people who depend on your overgiving don't understand is that the moment you stop rescuing them, they start calling your boundaries cruelty. They describe your absence as an attack because they cannot stand being left alone with the responsibilities they always plan to redirect onto you. But none of their escalating crises changed the truth. They had built an entire system around my unpaid sacrifice and called it closeness. They had mistaken my obedience for love, my silence for agreement, my presence for consent. One Saturday night, I sat on my little balcony with takeout balanced on my knee, a cheap lamp glowing through the sliding door behind me, the warm city air lifting my hair off my shoulders. Below me, the flower shop owner was closing up for the night. And I asked myself the question nobody in my family had ever once bothered to ask me. Who could I become if I stopped living as everyone else's solution? This time the answer didn't scare me.
It excited me.
Because sometimes the moment you stop overgiving for everyone around you is exactly the moment you finally meet the person you were always supposed to be. A week after I removed my name from everything, my sister called. Not a paragraph. Not a guilt trip. 3 words.
Call me now.
I almost ignored it. Then my phone started ringing before I could set it down. The second I answered, she was already shouting. What did you do? You took yourself off the school forms? You told the program you couldn't pick up the boys anymore? I leaned back against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes.
So this was it.
The move that finally reached somewhere that actually hurt. Yes, I said. Because I moved. She made a strangled sound. Mom had a dental appointment, and I had a closing across the city. The program wouldn't let my assistant pick them up because apparently only registered adults can collect the kids, and your name was always the backup. They charged us a late fee. ABA, they almost called child services. She said those words like I had summoned Child Protective Services out of spite. I let that hang there for a moment. Then I asked very calmly, did you ever once think about whether it was humiliating for me to come home after overnight shifts and raise your children for free? Silence. Then indignation because shame in people like my sister always comes back wearing an angry face. They're your nephews and you're their aunt. She started again, something about how real families show up, about how she was building her real estate business, about how Mom was overwhelmed, about how I could have at least given them warning.
Warning.
I had spent years warning them every time I said I was tired, every time I asked for a day to sleep, every time I tried to make plans and got handed a diaper bag instead. They just never believed I would actually leave. My mother joined the call after that, crying so hard she could barely speak. Why would you do this without telling me? Because every time I told you I needed a life, you laughed, I said. Because when you told me to pay rent or leave, what you actually meant was, keep serving this house or stop being useful. So I stopped being useful. That landed. I could hear it in the way the line went quiet. Then came the guilt inventory. My mother had missed 2 days of work. My sister had lost a client because she'd had to leave a showing early. The twins had been passed between neighbors, a babysitter they couldn't afford, and one disastrous afternoon in my mother's office. My younger brothers Cole and Jazz had been forced to take on more at home and were furious at everyone. The entire machine was breaking down now that its hidden engine had been removed. I won't tell you I felt nothing. That would be a lie. I felt grief, anger, vindication, and relief all at once. But more than anything, I felt clarity. What was happening to them was not a punishment I had created. It was the bill arriving for years of avoidance. My mother dropped her voice and tried one more angle. Just come back for a little while, until things calm down. There it was. The temporary favor. The bridge loan. Just help us close the gap. Just until, that is how people like my mother build cages out of temporary favors. I looked around my apartment. The second-hand bookshelf. The plant on the windowsill. My work schedule taped to the refrigerator. The life I was slowly building with my own hands. No, I said. I don't need to. The consequences kept rolling. My mother's church friends started calling, which told me exactly how the story was being told in their circles. In their version, I had gone through a selfish phase and left everyone in chaos. In the real version, she had spent years outsourcing the care and raising of her grandchildren to the daughter least likely to protest, and then panicked when that daughter finally set a boundary. A family friend named Denise left me a voicemail so self-righteous it gave me a headache, telling me my mother was under tremendous strain and that as women we sometimes have to carry more than our share for the people we love. That sentence used to work on me. Now it made me furious. Why was the burden always assigned to the most accommodating woman in the room? Why was my sister's career treated as important, my mother's stress treated as sacred, and my sleep, my income, my future treated as flexible? Then Cole called me from the backyard, sounding embarrassed to be the messenger. He told me about the work warning, the fights between my mother and sister, the boys' behavior getting worse from the constantly shifting schedule. Then he said the sentence that stayed with me. I didn't realize everything you were doing until you stopped doing it. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the first honest thing anyone from that house had said. I thanked him and told him none of this was his to fix. The following weekend, my mother appeared in the hospital parking lot after my shift ended. I recognized her car before she rolled down the window. She looked older than she had 2 weeks earlier. Not dramatically so. Just worn down by consequences she couldn't charm or guilt into disappearing. She asked if we could talk. I stayed standing. She started with the usual lines. She'd been stressed. She hadn't meant it like that. I had overreacted. Nobody expected this. Then something broke open. I really thought you'd come back that same day, she admitted. You always do. That almost undid me, because it was so honest and so devastating at the same time. She had counted on my pattern more than she had valued my pain. That is exactly the problem, I said. Everyone built their lives on the assumption that I would absorb whatever they threw at me. Her eyes filled immediately. We're family. Family is not a permission slip, I said. It's not a system where one person disappears so everyone else can be comfortable. She asked if I hated them. I told her, no. Hate would have been simpler. What I feel is harder than that. I love all of you too much to keep helping in ways that kept everyone broken. She tried one last push. Belle was drowning. The boys needed stability. Maybe I could at least take weekends. There it was. Even in the apology, they were still negotiating access to my labor. No, I said again. If Belle needs childcare, she can pay for it. If you need help, you can ask for it without acting like you're owed my life. She looked stunned. Maybe because nobody in our family had ever spoken that plainly. I drove home trembling, not from doubt, but from something that felt like release finally moving through my body after years of being held back. That night I signed the paperwork for my promotion. 2 days later, I bought a secondhand couch from a coworker and carried it up the stairs with help from my friend Lena and her husband. We ate pizza on the floor afterward and laughed about nothing important, and it was one of the best evenings I could remember. 3 weeks after that, my sister asked to meet. Not a text war. Not an ambush at my mother's house. An actual meeting at a coffee shop halfway between her office and my apartment. I almost said no. Then curiosity won. When I walked in, she was already there. No makeup. Hair in a rushed bun. Looking at an untouched coffee. She looked like someone who had been forced to meet herself and hadn't enjoyed the introduction. The first thing she said was, I hate that you were right. I sat down slowly. She told me she had lost 2 clients in 10 days because her schedule was so unstable. She and my mother had fought so badly one night that the twins heard everything and started
Crying.
paid childcare, she said, was more expensive than she had ever bothered to investigate because she had never needed to while I existed. My mother's hours at work had been cut for too many interruptions. The boys were exhausted from being passed around. Nothing in her voice sounded like performance. It sounded like someone scraping the truth up from somewhere deep in her own throat. Then she said, I didn't realize Mom was treating you that way because I was benefiting from it. It was the closest thing to accountability I had ever heard from her. It wasn't enough to erase anything, but it was enough to matter. I asked whether she wanted forgiveness or a free nanny. She let out a short, tired, bitter laugh. Before, those were the same thing to me, she said. Now I know they're not. We talked for almost an hour. She admitted that my mother used to call me the reliable one as though it were a compliment, when it actually meant the easiest one to use. She admitted she kept leaving the boys because she knew I would handle it, and that somewhere along the way she had stopped noticing how absurd that was. Then she slid something across the table. A check. Not a large amount, but real. For the errands and school fees and miscellaneous things she had promised to pay back over the past year. I looked at it for a long moment. I didn't need the money. I needed what it represented. An acknowledgement that my work had value. That my time cost something. That I was not just an extension of the household available for free at all hours. I took it, not because it balanced anything it never could, but because refusing it would have been the old version of me, the one trained to prove love by swallowing her losses whole. The following weekend I agreed to stop by the house for 30 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see the consequences before I even got out of the car. Lawn uncut. Toys scattered across the yard. Through the front window, I could see dishes in the sink and unfolded laundry piled on the sofa. It wasn't movie-level chaos. Just the dull, ordinary disorder that appears when the invisible worker is gone and everyone else is still learning how to function without her. My mother opened the door and started crying the moment she saw me. Not theatrical tears. Exhaustion tears. She hugged me, and I didn't pull her in immediately. I let myself choose to respond rather than automatically give. Inside, Cole was making boxed macaroni while Jazz hunted for a permission slip, and one of the twins colored on construction paper taped to the table because apparently that was the only way to keep him still. It was chaotic and loud and imperfect. It was also honest in a way the house had never been before. Nobody could pretend this place ran itself. My mother asked to speak privately in the kitchen. She said she was sorry. Not I'm sorry you felt that way. Not I'm sorry, but I was stressed. Just, I'm sorry. She said she'd been ashamed of how much she had relied on me, so she had disguised it as family obligation rather than admit it. She said losing control of the house had forced her to see how much I had been carrying. Then she said the sentence I think she had been avoiding her entire life. I was wrong to make your usefulness your place in this family. I wish I could tell you that healed everything instantly. It didn't. Some wounds don't close just because the truth finally gets spoken. But it mattered. I looked around that kitchen, where I had packed school lunches half asleep after night shifts, where I had held crying toddlers on one hip while signing forms with the other hand, where I had been told to pay rent as though my work meant nothing, and felt something quiet settle over me. You taught me something important, I said. Never let people confuse access with love. Never let them call dependency devotion. And never keep proving your value to people who only notice it when it's gone. My mother cried harder. My sister was standing in the doorway listening, silent for once. I stayed exactly 28 minutes. On my way out, one of the twins ran over and hugged my leg. I crouched down and kissed the top of his head, because none of this had ever been his fault. At the door, my mother asked whether I'd come for dinner the following Sunday. Not to help. Not to watch anyone. Just for dinner. I said maybe. And maybe was something new I had learned. Love doesn't always have to sound like yes right away. Sometimes love sounds like maybe. And maybe has to be enough. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on the balcony while the flower shop owner below closed up for the evening. And I thought about the version of me who had once believed that leaving would destroy her family. It didn't destroy them. It forced them to face themselves. And it saved me. The biggest lesson I took from all of it is this. Sometimes leaving is not selfishness. Sometimes it's education. It teaches the people around you what your work was actually worth. It teaches you that your identity cannot be built entirely out of sacrifice. And it teaches everyone involved that love without respect is just obligation wearing a friendlier face. So let me ask you this. If your family only noticed your value after you left, would you go back as the same person you were before? Or would you finally choose the version of yourself who no longer needs to earn a seat at the table? Because that version of you, she was always worth it. She just needed someone to stop filling her hands long enough for her to figure that out.